I was told recently that these are just tools to be used and sometimes abused, and by the looks of this one, the second part happened quite a bit more often. Of course, it is your machine and you're welcome to run it into the ground. And if you do, hopefully you'll pass it on to someone else who can fix it and then give it a second chance at life. That's because it would be a real shame to see any lawnmower go to a landfill. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Honda lawnmower, and the problem is that it starts and runs, but it's got a damaged valve cover. And on top of that, it has a wheel alignment issue that steers you into oncoming traffic. If you've been following along, this mower was severely damaged and required an engine swap to get it working again. But before we get too far into the project, we need to record all the stickers we can find, that way we can order the right parts for it. And if we can't save a couple of these parts, we'll definitely need to replace them. Luckily, these valve covers are still very affordable at about 20 bucks, which is kind of surprising. The same goes for the wheels. If we do choose to replace them, if only to make the mower look better, we won't have to spend too much money on it. However, luck is on our side because the mower that gave us the engine to put on this mowing deck also has great looking tires and wheels on them too. Now they don't look brand new, but in comparison to what was on the mower before, they're a huge improvement. Next up, we need to get the engine oil hot, that way we can do an oil change. So the engine's been running for several minutes and the oil should be pretty hot. And with it this hot, it'll help to flush out all the heavy sediments from the bottom of the engine. So here's the good news, the color of the oil isn't terrible, but I'm not happy with the streaking I'm seeing. Now this could be from moisture inside the engine because of the hole in the valve cover, but because of that, I'm choosing to do a flush. And it's a good thing we did because what comes out from the first flush still looks pretty bad. So I did do it again until the flush looked the same coming out as it did going into the engine. Next up are the wheels, but before we look at the bad wheel, I'd like to service this one first. Making sure your wheels spin without any issues just means it'll be easier to use the mower even if you're not using the self-propel. You can either do a deep clean and lubrication or something as simple as applying a thin oil to them. It is your machine and you get to decide what kind of time and effort you put into it. Now you don't need to do this kind of service very often, but it certainly won't hurt either. So the wheel that's steering us into traffic is the other front wheel. Now it's hard to tell on camera, but it is towed out slightly. And even with all the other wheels pointing straight, there is a slight pull to the left. Most times, I don't bother too much with a wheel alignment problem, but because of the weight of this mower, an alignment problem is hard to overlook. So to fix it, we'll take the wheel off and screw in a different bolt and then use some leverage to bend the arm back into place. Just be careful, otherwise you'll bend it too far and you'll need to do this again. So what caused the wheel to go out of alignment? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but I'm guessing they kept hitting something with just this one wheel while they were using the mower. Now if you didn't notice it, while I was servicing these wheels, I swapped them out for the other ones with more tread on them. I know it's such a small detail to bother with, but most buyers seem to prefer it. Next comes the valve cover, and for those that don't know, this is the damage that I'm most worried about. The previous owner was apparently bashing the mower against something, probably because they don't like using a string trimmer. But because of their carelessness, there is now a hole in the cover. So here's yet another problem. Taking off the cover on one of these Honda engines is not easy. The reason why is because they use a sealer instead of a gasket to seal the cover to the engine. That means even with all the bolts off the engine, the cover will be stuck to it. And to get it loose requires you to carefully pry on the cover, all the while trying not to damage it any further. Now you might be wondering why I took off the recoil and the spark plug, and the answer is pretty simple. With the valve cover gone, we'll have access to them, so I'm going to inspect and adjust the valve clearances. And with the cover free, we get to see the extent of the damage, not to mention how much dirt made it inside. It's not terrible, but you don't want any dirt inside the engine, so this is way more than you would want. Now what made the hole was the adjuster for the valves, which is pretty amazing. And that's because most times when it makes contact, it keeps the engine from starting. I'll then rotate the engine so that one of the arms is all the way down and the one we want to check is all the way up and loose. I'll then take my 5/1000 of an inch feeler gauge and see how it fits in the clearance. And it should just barely fit. However, the feeler is much too loose, which means we'll need to tighten it up. Now to make our adjustments, we'll need to loosen the jam nut, which will allow us to turn the adjuster in the middle. We'll then take the same feeler gauge from before and put it into the clearance and then turn the adjuster until the feeler almost gets stuck. Take your time doing this, but don't be surprised that you'll need to do it more than once to get it right. Once you get it adjusted where you want it, we'll then tighten the jam nut. Next, rotate the engine so that this one will be all the way down and the other one will be up and loose. And after checking the clearance here, turns out it too was out of adjustment and we'll need to do the same procedure here as well. So here comes the problem. How do we fix the hole in the valve cover? That's simple. We don't fix it and instead replace it, and the reason why is because we already have a spare one. Of course, there are multiple ways to repair the damage, but this is what's most convenient for me. But before I can replace the cover, it's imperative that I clean up all the old sealant unless I want an oil leak. This is going to take some time, so you'll have to go slow and be very methodical about it. The last thing you want is your new sealant not to stick to the old stuff. Now it doesn't have to shine, but just make sure there's not a trace of the old stuff on there. You're also going to need to clean the mating surface on the valve cover as well, but this time I have something else planned to seal it. And that's because this time I intend on switching to a gasket instead. Now I made this one out of some cork gasket that I bought in a large sheet, and to be honest, I just wanted to see if this would work. Now there's nothing wrong with using a sealer like the factory did, however, if we used it here, we'd have to wait for it to partially set up before adding oil to the engine. And that could take days before we could torque down the cover, and I really don't want to wait that long. Of course, if we start the engine and we see that the cover is leaking oil, we'll then go back to a sealer instead. So why didn't the factory just go with a gasket like most other brands do? Now if I had to guess, it's to save time and cost, as it's much easier to use a tube of sealant than sourcing someone to make gaskets for you. And of course, we can't forget the most important item we need to deal with, which is the engine oil. I'm not going to tell you which oil to use, so I'll leave that up to you to decide. But if you don't know where to start, I would just ask someone at the Lawn and Garden Center for help. And after checking that the oil was full, we'll then start the mower and make sure we didn't mess something up. So it's been running for several minutes and the engine should be good and hot. Let's see how it starts back up. So after our test run, we need to check for oil dripping from our gasket, and it looks like it's holding up quite well. I'll just keep using the mower and keep checking for leaks, and that's because if the gasket compresses over time, the bolts could get loose and that's when it'll start leaking. The gasket allowed us to get the engine running today versus days from now, and the best part is it's also reusable, whereas the sealer would need to be cleaned and reapplied if the cover needs to come back off again. I don't expect a lot of people to opt for the gasket, but I do think it's worth doing. However, I don't mind the gasket sealer either. So my question is, which one would you choose to use on the valve cover, the gasket or the sealer? Now there are pros and cons, and I know which one I would choose, but I'd like to hear what you would choose instead. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.